Hi, everyone. Welcome to a co-production of WION Live broadcast and VOA. I'm Susan Tehrani from New York. With U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken heading back to West Asia on Friday amid the Israel-Hamas war, experts are watching to see whether his itinerary will also include Turkey. Its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has praised Hamas as a liberating group and condemned Israel, a position that clashes directly with Washington's view. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
As thousands of Palestinians fled the fighting and Israel's bombing, U.S. President Joe Biden was asked whether there was any chance of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and he replied, none. He was also asked if he's getting frustrated with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not listening to U.S. requests.
It's taking a little longer than I hoped.
The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says more than 10,000 people have been killed in the territory since the Hamas attack on Israel that killed 1,400 people and triggered the war. At the State Department daily briefing Thursday, Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel provided some details about Israel's announcement that it has agreed to 4-hour daily humanitarian pauses in the fighting in northern Gaza.
There will be 2 humanitarian corridors allowing people to flee the areas of hostilities in the northern part of Gaza. The first such corridor opened between 4 and 5 hours every day for the past few days has already enabled many thousands of people to reach safer areas. The second route along the coastal road will enable many more thousands to reach safer areas in the south.
On Capitol Hill Wednesday, anti-Israeli government protesters showed up to a hearing where most Democratic and Republican lawmakers expressed their strong support for Israel. But some Democrats were troubled by the large number of civilians killed in Gaza. Democratic member Joaquin Castro said Israel has fired more than 20,000 bombs on Gaza and only about 5 hostages have been released.
It seems to me that Prime Minister Netanyahu is prioritizing collective punishment over the release of hostages. And I'm very concerned about that.
Another Democrat was concerned that new House Speaker Mike Johnson might be playing politics with U.S. military funding for Israel.
Speaker Johnson brought an Israel-only supplemental to the floor. This supplemental is unprecedented. It conditions aid to Israel on domestic policy objective and stands no chance of passing through the United States Senate.
The Republican chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCaul, said he agrees.
And let me just say, I too agree we need to move swiftly on a national security aid package that both addresses the threat from Russia to Ukraine and Europe, the threat from communist China to Taiwan and the Pacific, the threat from the Ayatollah in Iran to Israel by its proxies and the southwest border.
The Democratic majority Senate will not take up the $14.3 billion bill providing funding for Israel's air and missile defense systems passed by the Republican majority House of Representatives last week. Democrats objected to Republicans paying for the aid to Israel by making cuts to the budget of the Internal Revenue Service, the agency responsible for taxation. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
For more on this, we are being joined by VOA's Jessica Stone from the White House in Washington, D.C. Hi, Jessica. Good to see you. This week, the U.S. voted to reprimand the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, Rashida Tlaib. What led to that moment, and how is that playing into the conversation over aid to Gaza?
Yeah, it's definitely a part of the conversation, Susan, as you mentioned. The vote was 234 to 188 to censure Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. She had actually previously survived an attempt to censure her just a couple of days before. A censure is a formal vote taken by all the members of the House of Representatives, and it demonstrates a form of discipline that the Congress can implement against members of Congress that it deems to have violated principles of the U.S. Congress. It's on the way to expulsion, but it is not expulsion. It is just a formal reprimand. This resolution criticized Tlaib for using the slogan "From the river to the sea" in many of her remarks. That is something that she says is a call for freedom and human rights, but others say it's a call for erasure of Israel from the river to the sea. Tlaib, in response to the censure vote, says she will not allow this reprimand to keep her from speaking out.
And Jessica, the White House said yesterday, Thursday, that Israel has begun 4-hour pauses in the fighting in northern Gaza. How does this play into Washington's push for what it calls a humanitarian pause in the conflict to deliver aid to the civilians in Gaza and possibly move forward negotiations regarding hostages?
Yeah, it appears to be at least a decision on the part of the Israeli government to offer that humanitarian pause in the fighting. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby told reporters yesterday that they're going to provide a 3-hour notice to people before they do those 4-hour pauses. And this is something that Secretary of State Antony Blinken pushed for in Tokyo, with the G7 foreign ministers coming out with a statement in support of a humanitarian pause, which of course we should emphasize is different than a ceasefire or even a permanent ceasefire. It is simply a pause in the fighting so that more of these Gazans can leave the north of the country, go to the safer south, away from the fighting. It is also the case that President Joe Biden has said that he does support this 3-day pause and has been asking for it, the White House calling it a significant step. But Action Aid Palestine says it's not enough time to get people out because there is a lot of destruction to the people, to the roads that the people are using, and it's definitely not enough time to help them rebuild their lives. They are asking for a permanent ceasefire. And, you know, just to bring you up to speed on injuries and deaths here, the Hamas-run health ministry has tallied the death total at more than 10,000 Gazans. Meantime, there are more than 200 hostages still being held by Hamas.
All right, Jessica, please stay with me as we continue our coverage. This coming weekend, the leaders of 21 Pacific Rim nations and hundreds of CEOs will converge on San Francisco, California, here in the United States. And many member economies of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Bloc may profit as U.S. companies move production out of China under a practice known as friendshoring. VOA's Jessica Stone has more on this report.
For decades, China has served as the world's factory, as recently as 2020 contributing nearly double the total manufacturing output of the United States. Low wages, a well-developed infrastructure, and government support all contributed to its success. Supply chain consultant Rosemary Coates says these days many CEOs don't see China as a factory, but as a risk, and they're willing to pay more to avoid it.
Now, the executives that I'm working with not only look at dollars and cents, but they're evaluating global risk, geopolitical risk.
Coates says the combination of the pandemic supply chain disruption and Beijing's zero-COVID shutdowns has prompted some American executives to consider changing the way they look at manufacturing, choosing to work with countries that have a solid allied relationship with the U.S. It's a trend known as friendshoring, and it's a policy taking root among some of the 21 members of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC. Bloomberg data shows that cost-conscious U.S. apparel makers started moving out of China into Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Indonesia even before trade tensions with Beijing began in 2017. In the CHIPS Act of 2022, the Biden administration offered $500 million over 5 years to help modernize and secure new semiconductor supply chains.
We're starting to see the impacts in the data. Across sectors, from auto parts to electronics, the U.S. is importing more from key partners like India and Vietnam, as well as from Mexico, and is less dependent on one single country, in this case, China.
Last month, semiconductor maker Amkor Technology announced a new test and assembly plant in Vietnam. Likewise, Synopsys and Marvell have announced new semiconductor design centers there. Shoemaker Nike has also steadily shifted production from China to Southeast Asia for the past decade. Matt Pottinger, a former deputy national security advisor, says it's the culmination of decades of U.S. investment in the region.
The United States is deeply invested to the tune of well over $1 trillion in that stock of investment that has occurred over decades now.
But trade analyst Stephen Oken says not all of China's neighbors are ready to welcome U.S. companies and their factories.
You may want to diversify out of China. You may want to say, I want to make my supply chain more resilient, but where are you going to go? Because you can't take all of China and put it into Vietnam. You can't put it into Indonesia. You can't put it into India. So you're going to see some certainly diversification to create these resilient supply chains, but there are natural checks on how much that can happen.
After all, say trade analysts, China has spent years building its infrastructure, labor pool, and regulations to become the world's factory. And it's still the best place to make things for the Chinese market. Jessica Stone, VOA News.
All right, that was VOA's Jessica Stone reporting, and we continue to have her on the program. Jessica, India has long tried to join the APEC trade bloc. What are the obstacles, and does Washington back New Delhi's bid to join?
Yeah, and we should just point out that that story obviously was about the upcoming APEC summit that begins on Sunday, in which we will see the leader of China finally have an opportunity to meet with President Joe Biden. But in terms of India's desire to join APEC, this Pacific Rim trade bloc, Prime Minister Modi has been invited to attend by President Biden. We don't believe he will be there. But India has been trying to join this group since the 1990s. It's still considered an observer to the bloc. It's, however, has been more recently, as we've covered extensively, been building much more trade, economic, and defense relationships, both regionally and globally. Been building trade relations, for example, with the Indian ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. That they've also got a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement with Singapore and Malaysia. But trade experts say that India still needs more market liberalization in order to effectively get the benefits of the APEC trade bloc. That said, the U.S. has explicitly supported India's rise in global leadership and regional leadership. India is a part of the U.S.-initiated Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, which is the U.S.-led trade answer, if you will, to other agreements like RCEP and CPTPP. India is included in regional maritime security agreements. But I did ask a member of the Council on Foreign Relations yesterday for their analysis about whether India is likely to accede to the APEC framework. And he said simply, it's not likely in the coming years.
And Jessica, after more than a year, it seems that Xi Jinping of China is expected to come to the United States, to San Francisco, to meet with President Joe Biden. Do we have confirmation, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we do. We just got confirmation in the last couple of hours. Xi Jinping, the president of China, expected to meet with the president of the United States on November 15th. That would be next Wednesday, during the APEC summit. This is almost a year to the day that the two leaders met in Bali, Indonesia, made several promises about restoring communication lines and improving relations. And shortly after that, of course, was the spy balloon incident here in the United States, which really set the relationship on a different path. Bloomberg has named Xi Jinping as the guest of honor at a dinner on Wednesday night, where there will be hundreds of global executives from various companies. And he is also expected to speak on Thursday morning at the APEC CEO Summit. This is a real opportunity, of course, for CEOs to get a better handle on where he sees the economic integration of China going forward. There has been a lot of upheaval in the U.S.-China relationship around trade, around export controls, around foreign investment controls on the part of China. And ever since, there have been a flurry of meetings on both sides of the Pacific, having U.S. and Chinese officials meeting ahead of this and laying the groundwork for an effective conversation between President Xi and President Biden. We expect it to take a couple of hours, much like the meetings in Bali, Indonesia, and hopefully result in some takeaways, including from the U.S. perspective. What they really want is open communication, particularly in the event of any military issues, particularly like that spy balloon incident. They had a very difficult time, they say, getting a hold of Chinese officials to talk through what was going on and how to keep it from happening again. They want to make sure that going forward, these two countries, the two largest economies in the world with a lot of tension, especially in the Pacific around Taiwan, around the South China Sea, and even into the Indian Ocean, they want to make sure they can talk about and deconflict any possible military results of any military activity between the two countries. Susan?
Jessica Stone, live from the White House. Thank you so much for all of that, and have a great weekend.